focus your efforts there. So all sorts of kind of tips and techniques. Make sure you choose what I've put here as a non-predatory journal with a high impact factor. So, first, what is this thing non-predatory? There are thousands of bad journals out there, and I mean really bad. Nature and others have done investigations of open access journals and found they'll just take your money and publish as is with no review. And they've had fake articles they've sent, like, I've cured cancer. Boom, and it's published. So you need to really be careful of those types of journals. You can check a journal's quality according to tiers, and I know this is what Unit 10 does. You go to Scopus or ISI, and you see the different percentiles. I'll talk about that in a second. Always read the aims and scope of the journals on their web pages. It's usually a paragraph that says what the journal talks about, and if you don't fit, don't submit. I would also pick one with an online submission system. You may be thinking, of course, online submission system. Not the case. There are still some journals out there that only take submissions via email. And worse, there are a few that you still have to print the manuscript out, make 5 copies, and put it in the post. And I've had situations where the post gets lost, or they're on vacation for 6 months, etc. So I almost only now do journals that are online, and almost all of the really good ones are now entirely online. Like I said, journals are ranked. There are different ranking systems. This is the list from NUS. It's a bit transposed. Where you can see they have 4 tiers, just like Malaysia. Premium, outstanding, good, average. They never say bad, do they? Average is the low tier. And I think in Malaysia it's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. Australia gives the journals an A. That's good, or a B, that's okay, or a C. In Denmark, we simply have a 2-tier system where confusingly tier 2 is better than tier 1. And I'm just mentioning this because the numbers don't always match, but you obviously want to aim for journals in the top tier or second tier. How are they selected? The impact factor. What a term, impact factor. The impact factor is the average number of times an article in that journal is cited. And actually, this is quite depressing because you can see here. Remember I told you I published a piece in Social Studies of Science. That was the theory piece. It's number 1. So it's the top, tier 1. Through History and Philosophy of Science, but its impact factor is just 1.3. That means the average article they publish is only read and cited by 2 other people, if that. Isn't that depressing? And that puts it in the top. So these impact factors do matter, and some journals that get up to 4, 5, anything above 1 is considered good, anything above a 3 or 4 is considered very good, and then you have some ridiculously high journals, like Energy and Environmental Science is 18, but it's not the top. You want to know what the top is? Nature Energy. You know what it is? 41. So it matters, and most journals, my own included, when you go to the website, it will say, here's our aims and scope, and here's our impact factor. And you can click and see where it sits in the different percentiles. I also like journals that promote your work for you. Hey, isn't that great? And that is why I like Science Direct. So there are some journals that give prizes. So right now, I can tell you, there's a journal called Case Studies in the Environment. It's published by University of California Press. It's currently, as in right now, accepting submissions. And there is a competition. The best article wins $2,000 US. 2 second places, $500 US. You can bet they get a lot more submissions because of the prize, and they know it. Others will give free open access, like environmental research letters. And again, there are still others, like Energy Policy or Electricity Journal, which will do these types of updates. And these really do help. These updates go out to millions of people because these publishing houses know them all. And so I was really delighted, back in 2009, Energy Policy was like, here are our hottest articles, and there's one of mine. Yay. And same with Electricity Journal, not looking at hot articles, but looking at downloaded articles. I was number 2 for that. So that's good, and people do read these. In fact, many people are lazy and may only do these to see which articles are hot. Lesson 14. Sorry, it's a little less relevant for students at this point, but it's still helpful for the researchers. Recommend reviewers. Do you know most journals now make it mandatory? Energy policy says you have to choose 3 reviewers. My journal is really tough. We say you've got to choose 6 because we have a minimum of 3 reviews. Some journals like Science will ask for 8. Others make it optional. You should always do it. Really. There are many bad reviewers out there. Let me just tell you 4 stories. The worst review I've ever had for a peer-reviewed article. Remember, I did all those things I said. 1 or 2 years of research. I chose the journal carefully, wrote a cover letter, title and abstract. In it went to the online submission system. Rejected. 1 review. 1 word. No. The editor probably shouldn't have let that review go through because it was a really bad review. But what a jerk, right? Not even explanation. There was one reviewer who was so angered by an article that I wrote that their review was longer than the article. There was another one, never completed their review. They made a mistake. So I was reading through the reviewer comments, and then it says, off to dinner, make a note to come back to this. That was the end. They forgot that they didn't finish their comments, right? So these are all examples of like, people I don't want to review my things. So when you get an opportunity to suggest good people, do it. And by the way, just as an aside, as you are reviewing, the kind of norm is 1 to 2 pages of comments. That's like 3 to 4 paragraphs. You don't have to write 10 pages. You also shouldn't do just a few sentences. You kind of want to have a middle ground in terms of length. But you should pick reviewers. Make sure they are competent. Make sure they are objective. Also make sure that they'll usually do things quickly. Don't choose someone who's going to be on sabbatical, hiking around Australia for a year. You can also consider having what's called a reviewer pool. And I do this. There are colleagues of mine who all say, look, I like the work that you do. I won't tell you which manuscripts, but I'm going to suggest you for some as a peer reviewer. And you can do the same for me. So it's like a group of 20 of us where I keep suggesting them as reviewers over and over again. And I don't know who accepts, because sometimes it's always blinded. But there's an example of how that helps, because it means that there are people that you know and kind of respect that have similar views to you. The only rule about choosing reviewers that you don't want to violate is you can never choose people that you work with at your institution or co-authors, and you obviously don't want to choose those that have an obvious bias for or against your work. Otherwise, you could nominate anyone. When in doubt, number 15, write to the editors. This is also okay. I get about 100 emails a week, people writing to me, and that's my job, is to handle these things. If you have questions, does my article fit the aims and scope? How long is your review time? What's your acceptance rate? Oh, I don't know your impact factor, can you tell me? I see that you've already got a lot of volumes this year. When's the next production schedule? And this also matters. I did not check this one time. And I have an article that was accepted in 2012 and published in 2016. It just sat there waiting until it was available. Most journals, and we do this as well, have an editorial assistant or a team or a managing editor. Well, I say we get 100 emails. Are you a managing editor?
Yeah, Prof. I have one question because it's relevant because you mentioned that you have gone through 6 years. So what about the data that you have identified and also analyzed the particular paper? After 6 years, it could be invalid. Like it's happened to me. Our paper we submitted to Nature with MIT and Hamburg University in 2015 when the Paris Agreement just endorsed. So after six revisions, our paper rejected from the Nature based on the condition that it is no more relevant. So
really frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah, it's frustrating.
when you email them, how long does it take them to get back to you? If they can't handle a simple email, how long is it going to take them to handle your article and the review process? And this can save a lot of time. When people email us, if it doesn't look good, I'll just tell them, no, I don't think that's a good fit for us. That saves them all the time they would have taken to read the journal, try to frame it for the journal, submit, suggest reviewers, and all of that. After you've submitted, it's not over. Keep following through. So I have a list in my to-do list. Every 4 months, I will check in with every editor about every article that I have under review. And in doing that, you'd be surprised at the mistakes that I found. One was like, oops, I forgot about that. Thanks for the reminder. One didn't even know it was submitted. And this was not his fault. This was a system failure. There was some technical glitch where all the submissions for that day never showed up in his assignment portfolio. And there was another one. Now, the submission systems get so advanced, they'll often tell you when reviews are in for your article. And we waited for 2 months and eventually told the reviewer, we're ready. Hi.
We have 4 more. We have 20 and we're not 16.
4 more. Tips for how to publish. So number 16, you can treat some reviewer suggestions as optional. So this is a mistake a lot of authors make. They've submitted their article, they've gotten all their reviews, they have to do every one, even the ones that are really unreasonable. Dear Prof. Rashid, we quite like your satellite data on Malaysia. Could you also do Thailand? You know, you're like, oh. So, you don't have to. First of all, like I said earlier, if the editorial decision was minor revisions, yeah?
I got not from Thailand, from India. India asked me to do for them. I said,
Exactly. Unreasonable requests. So, and also remember, like I said, if it's going back with minor revisions, it won't go back to the peer reviewers anyway. They won't even see it. So you can be a bit more strategic about which comments that you want to take on board. Publishers will say nonsense, take everything seriously, but I've found roughly half of the suggestions you can ignore if you have a good reason for doing that. And you can still risk it and ignore more. Understand the reviewers may not have read it. The reviewers may not know as much about the topic as you do. Usually you're the most critical anyway of your own work. And this is brilliant. I've used this more than once. You've got a really, really good comment from a reviewer that's really difficult to address. What do? Oh, reviewer 3, this is an outstanding suggestion. I'm not sure I'm smart enough to do it. Can you help me? Yes. And then, you know, they'll write back in the response to reviewers, oh yes, I'm happy to help. Maybe you should look at this article. What about this? What about this? So the reviewers work for you when you ask them for help in a polite way. Yeah.
Normally, how long should we do a review if somebody asks you to review papers?
Jeez. I'd be so excited, Prof. How long should you as a reviewer do?
Yeah.
Most journals will set a deadline of 30 days. Generally 30 to 60 days. Some, though, like Science or Nature, will want it in like 2 weeks.
Some they give like 3 days, 1 week.
I know.
So it's really.
That's ridiculous. I've never seen that before. I just broke your mouse. I dropped it. I can do this, I think. Alright. Number 17. This is really hard. Expect to be rejected. There are 350,000 academic journals. Across those journals, we submit 6 million articles a year. Guess how many are rejected? 81%. The rejection rate across all journals is 81%. So the odds are not good. 1 in 5. You have to write 5 papers until you get one that might be accepted. Yep. going way ahead of myself. So, try to mentally prepare yourself for the worst. That way you will be happy if you're successful, rather than sad if you're not successful. And like I said, I got to know Eleanor Ostrom, who's the Nobel laureate in economics, the first woman to win it a few years back before she died. And she said, the more innovative the paper, the more likely it is to be rejected. And she gave a great example. The papers that were cited in her Nobel Prize nomination had been rejected 5 times before they were published. They were just too ahead of the time, too revolutionary. And you can appeal rejections, but only in extreme cases are you usually successful. And again, editors are busy and underpaid and overworked. I process 1,000 articles a year as an editor, and there are other journals like Applied Energy that get 20,000 submissions. They have an editorial team of 5, right? So they just don't have the time. And you know how much money I get from Elsevier? Enough maybe to cover 1 plane ticket to Malaysia a year. All of that work. Economy class. That says, as you're preparing for rejection, do watch out for things that don't seem right. So for instance, we had a piece that was criticizing the Asian Development Bank. And who did they send it to review? The ADB. So of course they hated it. That's a conflict of interest. Or I had an article about women and cooking and why gender was really important and how men didn't appreciate how important gender was. And there was a reviewer who said, I'm a man, this isn't very important. That proved my point. Inappropriateness. I do have one article review where they swore at me. There was profanity in the review. I hate mother effing people like you who try to critique clean coal, etc., etc., etc. There are situations too, this really hurts, where it passes peer review. The reviewers say accept it, and the editor still rejects it because they didn't like it. And I wrote back to the editor and said, well, why did you send it for review? And they said, we didn't think it was going to make it. And then editorial error. This one was quite shocking. The editor just clicked the wrong button. They were supposed to click accept, but they clicked reject, didn't realize it. All of these are situations where we made appeals to the editors, although the only one we were ever successful with was that last one, which was the error. In the energy policy community, with all the experience I've got publishing, I'm still only about 80% successful. But anytime I try to publish outside of the energy field, I'm only successful about 20% of the time. So I'm right at the average if I try to publish in business, or economics, or environmental studies. Okay. Luckily, you've had your first article accepted, you've overcome rejection. What do? Then disseminate your work. And this, I think, is where 90% of us scholars are really bad. Because we are convinced, once the article is done, it's released into the world and it goes off and educates everyone. When in reality, that's not the case itself. Sometimes disseminating your work is even more work than the article itself. You should at first create your own Google Scholar profile. Prof. Rashid has one, I have one. It tells you your H factor, which is the number of times and number of articles you have cited. And citation counts do matter. It's often how people get promoted. It's also how universities are ranked. So how do you get citations up? How do you get people to use your work? You can ask them to. I don't mean, dear Prof. Rashid, please cite this paper. I mean, dear Prof. Rashid, this new piece of research might be useful as you study whatever it is you're studying. Cite their work in return. So you can say, you can bet every paper I write will now probably cite Prof. Rashid in some way. So I can send it to him and say, look, Prof. Rashid, your work has been really useful. You can cite your own research, but not too much. Generally, few articles if you've got previous body of knowledge is acceptable. You don't want to only cite yourself. Plus there is a kind of trend against gratuitous self-citations. Keep on top of the literature and email others when things come out. And there are some colleagues of mine. Daniel Kamen is a distinguished professor of energy at UC Berkeley. Very prominent scholar, age factor, citation indexes, maybe 50,000 citations. He's published in Nature and Science. He's very good. He no longer does literature reviews. Do you know why? His network is so good, people email him everything he needs. So because people like me are sending him, hey, Daniel, check out this new article, he's getting 20 or 30 of these a month, and that is his lit review. And his kind of thinking is, if it's good, it'll be sent to me. So there's an example of how, if you hadn't taken the time to email people like me or Prof Rashid your work, we might never know about it. And then finally, I would strongly advise professional websites. I know we have them at Uniten, but also personal websites. Daniel Kamen has danielkamen.com. My head of department, Johan Schott, has bigshot.com. So you can have your personal websites to help disseminate your work. Also keep in mind, impact can take a variety of forms. It's not just citations. And the final presentation I'm giving Tuesday will be all about impact. It can be citation counts, it can be author impact factor or H index, but it can also be downloads. I'm delighted to know that my research has been downloaded 1 million times. At least that's what Elsevier tells me. You can also join things like the Social Science Research Network, SSRN, and I get an email every month telling me, dear Prof, you're in the top 2% of downloads across all scholars. Your rank is 15,000 out of 2 million, or whatever it is. If your work comes out in court decisions, which it has, I was delighted that some of my work on carbon footprints has been cited in the Supreme Court of the US when they tried to decide permitting decisions. Is this facility clean or dirty? Does it meet a certain criteria? Political testimony. I also am on the record in Singapore's parliament for endorsing the feed-in tariff. Citations in the popular press, Newsweek, New York Times, International Herald Tribune, Fortune, Financial Times, right? When they're mentioning your work, that's really important. Are you getting emails? People say, oh, I really read this. What are you doing next? Or, this looks interesting, can you send it to me? Again, I get a few dozen of those every week. That reminds you that people are out there. And if you're not getting those emails, it tells you maybe your research isn't really getting read. Are people asking you to join consultancies or fellowships? Uniten? I think when they selected these professors went to Scopus and searched to see who was doing impactful work. Are you getting interview requests from the media? BBC. Is there still Channel News Asia? What's Malaysia's TV?
TV 1, 2, 3.
TV 1, 2, 3. I would love to see you on TV 1, Prof Rashid. Are you getting invited to conferences? And then, really rarely, and I put this up here, advertising.
Florida was shown last month. It appeared in television. Zamri, I know Zamri was there.
Prof Zamri.
Okay.
That's an example of impact when you get these requests from the media. Are you getting invited to give keynotes at conferences or at least to lead panels at conferences? That's another sign of impact. And then finally, advertising. What is this woman up here? I was quite shocked that my own research on wind energy was used in a series of advertisements in California. So these were billboards around the interstate in San Francisco and Los Angeles, presenting the results of a study that we had done looking at wind versus natural gas. I'm not sure why the woman is there, because she has nothing to do with the study, but I guess she draws the eyes of certain men. So that was another sign of having impact. That's really cool. One of my studies created billboards. The key about dissemination is you have to be active. You cannot be passive. Arrange to have newspaper articles that you write, editorials. And I'm lucky enough that I have a piece in the Wall Street Journal talking about nuclear power. Do you have newsletters here at Unit 10? Volunteer. Students, professors volunteer to write something for the newsletter. They're always looking for material. Have press releases. If you have a book you're about to publish, have an event. Get some pineapple and some biscuits and some tea, and invite the reporters and invite colleagues. Have a debate. Have a roundtable. Have a discussion. Make it an event. You can even have T-shirts made that have the book's cover on the shirt to disseminate. Print your work and take it with you to conferences. This is a bit less relevant now that we have PDFs. But back in the day, when I was a young, budding scholar, everywhere I went, there was one suitcase that was my clothing, and there was one suitcase that was my articles. And when I would go to the conference, I would pass them out everywhere I went. I would go up to the conference table and put them down and leave them for people to take. And most of the time, they would be taken. You can also email things. So I have an Excel sheet by different topic: gas, biofuel, nuclear, wind, EVs, as well as location: Asia, Europe, US. Anytime something is relevant to that, I will email 50, 60, 70 people on those lists. Also, you can do what's called converting or translating your articles for a different audience. So you take your study about renewables and you make it into a short report. Lots of colorful graphics, a nice design, etc. Or a briefing sheet. This is a 4-page briefing sheet that we did at NUS. The truth about nuclear power. And this is just a newsletter. At the Lee Kuan Yew School in NUS, they had so much money, they could even make newsletters look really good. So, and they called it the Rapporteur. And again, you could also go to conferences. Prof. Rashid, how many conferences are you going to a year?
Conferences?
Yes, how many?
At least 10 probably.
10 conferences a year. If you brought 100 articles for each conference, you've disseminated 1,000 articles. Which is a great way of, and you already know at the conference, people are there because they're interested in that topic or they wouldn't have paid the registration fee. Hopefully.
Yeah, I think just sometimes they also from Europe, from Asia.
Yeah.
I didn't like that. I didn't like that. That bring people to
Yes.
to
Well, sometimes you go because of location. Most of the time you should go because of the topic. All right, we're almost done. 2 left. Only 2 left. Ethics is really important. I've saved what I think are the 2 most important ones for the end. Always be ethical. Obviously, misconduct is fraud, fabrication, or plagiarism. These 3 things can be very serious. They can get you arrested, or they can get you fired, or kicked out of the university if you're a student. So don't falsify data, don't fabricate results, don't plagiarize, which is a huge problem here in Asia, especially because of Chinese students, because the notion of intellectual property isn't so clear-cut in China. Also keep in mind there are many different types of plagiarism, different forms and severities. So for instance, I've plagiarized myself sometimes for the research methods part, because if you did a survey and here are the demographics of the survey, it's the same if you're going to do more than 1 article. So there's an example of acceptable plagiarism because it's the methods part, whereas it wouldn't be acceptable to have the same introduction or the same conclusion. Papers also have to be original. This is where there's a fine line between multiple publications from the same data set. So just make sure there is a materially different contribution for each paper. Don't have multiple submissions. And this is tricky because most journals will say you submit it to us, that's it. You cannot submit it anywhere else until we decide. But some students find that confusing. And if it's going to take them a year to review, maybe you don't want to wait and you want to send it somewhere else. But you're not supposed to do that. Same with having redundant publications. Now, these ones are really tricky. Have you acknowledged everyone who helped with the research? Everyone who helped collect the data? Everyone who helped copy edit? What about ideas? What about Prof. Rashid and I talking last night over a cup of kopi about satellite imagery? Maybe I gave him an idea. Did he mention me in the paper down the road? Inappropriate authorship. This can go both ways. People have gotten kicked off of papers they should be authors on. And there's a big problem in the United States where the big boss, his name goes on every paper, even if he never saw it. Because he's the boss, he's at the lab, you work for him or her. I've seen the other way go as well. People write to me, "Dear Prof, you're very eminent. I've added your name to my manuscript. Thank you." No, I didn't do anything. No, take me off. Right? So you can have authors that are added that shouldn't be, authors that are taken off that also belong to people. This one is also interesting. Conflict of interest. Most journals will now ask you to disclose potential conflicts of interest. So UNITEN, because they're so close to TNB, does have a conflict. So when you're writing about Malaysian energy policy, you should probably disclose that you're funded by an organization that does electricity supply. In the same way that I have to disclose the grants that I have when I'm doing research, so people can know, do I have a vested interest? Am I being independent and impartial? A good example would be if I own stocks, which I don't. But if I own stocks, let's say in Tesla, the electric vehicle company, and then I wrote a paper about how good Tesla was, that's a conflict of interest, because that paper can enhance the stock value, which gives me a financial contribution. All right. Generally, the order of authors also matters. Did you know this? Don't just do it by alphabetical order, although sometimes you can. Usually the first author is the most important. And in the social sciences, it's usually in order of who did the most work. So the lead author did the 70% of the work, and the second author did 20%, and then the person who did 5% goes at the end. Sometimes work is divided evenly. Then, well, it's tricky. Then you can maybe just flip a coin, or you can rotate. If you have two papers, you lead one, the other person leads the other, or you just do it alphabetically. My own take on authorship is extremely generous, I've been told. Extremely liberal and inclusive. For me, anybody who helped me collect the data, interviews, focus groups, surveys, or wrote any part of the text, even just a paragraph, if you did that, either of those, you are qualified to be an author if you want to be, in my book. And that's why some of my articles have 10 authors, 15 authors, etc., because they're large research teams. However, this is not the only view. There is a view that RAs and students should never be authors because they're employed. It's their job, right? You can just acknowledge their help in an acknowledgement section, not treat them as an author. Still others work for hire. It's like a consulting firm. When you see these reports that are done, or the ministries, usually these ministries will publish a report by the ministry. You don't know who wrote it, right? The idea is that their authorship doesn't matter because they did it for hire. It belongs to somebody else. Like ghostwriting is what we call it in English. What about this one? What about advising? I advised the work, so therefore I belong as an author. I don't agree with that, but there are those who do. And that is okay as long as you agree as the student or the author. Unfortunately, this is all a gray area. There is no standard way of determining authorship, which means make it explicit. When a paper begins, talk about authorship. Don't wait till the end. and you might be disappointed. Work out who will do what, and if things change, then you can change the order of authors or add people in at a much later stage. You can also add authors at a much later point. So there have been a few times now where we've gotten a paper that we did, it goes for review, and it comes back, and we add an author in to help us with the reviewer comments. That is okay. Same with taking someone off. If they didn't contribute enough, or they're on maternity leave, or they got ill, or they're unemployed and they don't have time, then you can remove them as an author. Like I said, agree on authorship before a study starts, and watch out for unintentional plagiarism. When you start to write a lot every day, I write every day, you think in certain ways, you use certain phrases, right? You have a certain style. So you may not know that you've actually written a sentence that's very similar to something else. So watch out for self-plagiarism. And like I said, sometimes methods are okay, but the rest of the manuscript has to be new. If possible, do a plagiarism check on your own work. And I do this. I think I saw Unit 10 uses, is it Turnitin?
Yeah.
Yep. There's also Authenticate, which is what we use at Sussex. I think those two are the best. Every article that I write, I will do this myself, and I will still catch times that I didn't cite myself properly, or I didn't cite other work properly. You'd be amazed. And every time we get a submission at the journal that I edit, we do an Authenticate check. And I would say 1 out of every 3 times we are rejecting a piece because it's too high of a similarity score. All right, the final lesson. Going back to Voltaire. The perfect is the enemy of the good. Good is good enough. Granted, we don't want to do bad research. But I think most of us go too far the other way. We are too careful. We are too conservative. Don't wait for perfection. Submit an article not because it's perfect. Submit an article because it's ready for peer review. It's good enough to at least get you to the next stage. Why? Remember what I said. Review can take years. If it takes you 2 years to write it, then it's year 7 that it's published in rather than year 5 or 4. Stake your claim. If you take too long, someone else may do it already and beat you to it. And this happened to us. We got a $1 million grant from the MacArthur Foundation to do work on energy security. And being somewhat savvy, we did a press release that said what we were going to do with the project. Well, another research team in Australia read the press release and said, that's a good idea, let's do it first. And they did. They published what we were supposed to do. Granted, we were then able to claim that we were testing their ideas, but it was really frustrating, and it shows if you wait, you can lose out. And then finally, peer review is confidential. If you send an article in and it's rubbish, no one is going to know. And if it's blind peer review, no one will even know that it's you. There's nothing to lose. And there's a lot to win. In a worst case scenario, you get good comments back for free. In a best case scenario, you've published. Publishing, perhaps like dating or looking at houses, is a numbers game. I have had some of the papers that I think are really bad be published. And some of my best papers that I'm like, this is fantastic, they're rejected. You never know. I have also taken the very same article, which you're not supposed to do, got it back from the journal, lots of comments, this is horrible, we don't like it, bad method, bad topic, get a native English speaker, that really hurts. And I said, these guys are jerks. I submitted it to another journal, same tier, all tier 1, same impact factor, it was accepted as is. That just goes to show you, we got unlucky with the first one, and we got lucky with the second one. It is that random sometimes. Finally, writing is like exercise. The more that you do it, the better you get at it. Or playing the piano, or cooking. Force yourself to write every day. There used to be, and you've probably heard this, dear Prof, I cannot write today, it's a bad writing day. I just can't. And granted, some days are better than others. But now I can write every day. If I've had 1 hour of sleep, I can write. If I'm in the back of a taxi or an airplane, I can write if I have to. Probably not an article, probably a grant proposal or a peer review. But if you do that, you'll find eventually you will reach a point where you can always write every day. All right, so to sum it up, that was a long presentation. Almost out of time. What are the key takeaway messages? Reorders. Good is good enough. Submit as soon as you can. Don't wait. Be comprehensive in your lit review. Mixed in your methods. Rigorous in your data. Don't presume that good data will have a good article by itself. Be persuasive. Write to your audience. Tell narratives and stories. Use figures, tables, charts, maps, photographs. Have fun. Research is such an important part of life here at the university. In Sussex, 70% of my time is supposed to be spent doing research. 20% is teaching, and 10% is service. So 70% of what I'm doing every hour is research, research, research. I would be miserable if I didn't know how to have fun. So try to find ways that you can enjoy it, whether it's a good topic or good partners or other cheeky things like a funny title or a joke or other things that motivate you. When you choose journals, make sure it has a good impact factor, and if you're really aiming for excellence, tier 1 is what matters the most. Make sure that it is indexed online. Make sure that it is generally quick with reviewing. Make sure it has an online system for submissions. If you can, choose peer reviewers yourself, but know that you can ignore some of their comments. You don't have to adhere to all of their comments. This is really tricky. Flip your mentality to expect rejection. I really still do this. Every time I get an email that says you've been accepted, I say yes. Every time I get an email that says I've been rejected, I say, that's what I expected. Always remember the importance of disseminating your work after it's done. And please be ethical. Don't falsify or fabricate. You could lose your job. And make sure that you really have collective discussions about who can offer and what counts. And with that, I will now gladly sit down after 2 hours and take questions. Thank you for coming.
Questions?
Sure. A very good question. What is mixed methods? There's a bit of confusion about mixed methods and multi-methods. So multi-methods would be a kind of a research design that has multiple steps. Like you first collected data, and then you modeled it, and then you mapped it maybe spatially. So that would be a multi-method study. Mixed methods is taking distinct methodologies and using them to collect data. Generally, mixed methods are usually quantitative plus qualitative. So you've got a focus group or interview or a narrative, and then something like statistics, etc. Structuring that can be really tricky, which I think is what you're getting at. Because a paper that would be structured, method 1, results 1, method 2, results, looks really ugly. That's why I find in these types of situations, a structure that's either thematic or hypothesis-driven makes a lot of sense. So you could say, look, in this article, we're testing 3 hypotheses with all 3 methods. Hypothesis 1, and here's what our data says. Even if it's method 1, method 2, method 3 in paragraph order. The other way is more thematic. Things that came out of your research. So if you were looking, let's say, energy poverty, maybe one of the themes that comes out is theft. People steal electricity, they don't pay T&B. Which is a huge problem in places like India and Nepal. In Nepal, half of the electricity is gone. They don't know where it goes because people don't pay. So you could have a section on theft, thievery, and then you can have all of the methods and the data that support it. Maybe the next thing that you found was about productive energy and income generation and growth. That could be another thing you talk about. You talk about electrification. And then you have another section on maybe innovation. So it's a bit more inductive, and it's hard because it means that when you're done, you have to sit and think. But you could also do it another way and say, what are the 3 most important findings from your study? Finding 1, finding 2, finding 3, and then you present your results that way. There are 8 or 9 ways to organize a manuscript. The IMRAD way, introductions, methods, results, discussion, is what we're most used to, but it's not the only one. You can do it topically, technologically, chronologically, if there's time involved. So when we did a piece looking at the SREP, the Small Renewable Energy Program, we did it chronologically. Here's what happened in 1990, here's what happened in 2000, here's what happened in 2005. Or if you have a project looking at different sectors, like we're working on a proposal with UNITEN looking at storage and microgrids, that could be your paper. Here's the microgrids, here's the energy storage. So you've organized it by technology.
But usually all journals have their standard.
Not anymore. Even those that do will usually let you get away with it. But the ones that I publish in, like Applied Energy, Energy Conversion and Management, which are engineering journals, even though they say use this template, I don't. You can, but you don't have to.
Prof, can you elaborate a bit on this grounded theory?
Ah, yes, grounded theory.
My sister is doing psychology. She really telling something different.
Grounded theory, very widely used tool in geography, anthropology, ethnography. And the idea there is, if you're studying a phenomenon that is so complex or has never been studied before, there might not be a theory that explains what's going on. Like, how did President Trump get elected? There's no theory that existed that every theory we had said he was going to lose. So there's an example of you have to create a new theory that explains that event. So what grounded theory says is you don't start with any theory. You are theoretically agnostic. All you start with is your data. What happened? Or in this case, what data do I have? What are the results? And then you inductively code, by looking through that data, a framework that makes sense. And look for factors or themes and all of that. So that's why it's called grounded theory. It's grounded in the data itself. And oftentimes, when there isn't a clear-cut framework to use, we do tell our students use grounded theory. Because it sounds good, and you're not really creating a new theory, but it at least is a new explanation for a complexity.
Can we do also for review, like about the policy? Let's say we have the data for renewable energy development. So we analyze the data and we like how to say create a theory why this works and
Yeah.
why that is not.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's absolutely acceptable. You don't have to call it a theory, it could be a framework. Where you like, sometimes I see it called theory of change. Sometimes it's just a good discussion, results in discussion. But yes, I think that's quite a helpful technique.
Prof, would you be willing to do one session with maybe our staff or our students, postdoc students?
Yes, depends on how many, but yes, I would.
Would be okay? Shit.
Contact me. You have to go through it.
He is my boss.
So we have a team. We have a team who organize the timing, his timing.
Okay.
If you agree.
I'll contact Prof Rashid first.
I'm here till the end of the month.
Contact Sulaiha. Contact Sulaiha. My RA.
What session to postdoc for?
Yeah.
Very good, Prof.
Thank you.
TMB also asked for a session already. They received the attachment that I sent to your TMB also. And Kenta also. Mustard, right? Mustard to 15.
What's that?
Mustard, we're going to
Yeah.
Mustard
Yeah,
on the
commission.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
You have a great new minister, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Review.
younger than all of us, I think.
Both are young. The Mr. and the APT.